Mysterious booms of Cayuga Lake. The strange sounds of the so-called Seneca guns have been heard along the East Coast and throughout the Appalachian region for generations, mystifying the locals and the scientists there alike. The rumbling, which is likened to distant cannon fire, has no really clear origin. Accounts go all the way back to the early 1800s, and some say even earlier, long before modern machinery. Over time, these noises have taken on a sort of life of their own, sparking legends and theories across the whole area. In fact, the Seneca people themselves had their own story. They believed that the sounds were the voice of their god Manitou warning or punishing those who had broken the land's natural order. The booms have now come to be known by many names, from the Seneca guns to the lake gun. James Fenimore Cooper described them in 1850 as the explosion of a heavy piece of artillery in a short story, The Lake Gun. He wrote of how in the lake you could hear distant sounds that seemed to echo between the hills. But it's also important to note that Cooper's story had sort of a satirical angle about American politics, but it did add more attention to the mystery, which prompted more people to come forward with their own accounts of these strange noises. In local Seneca legend, the guns are also tied to the story of Agayenta, who was a wandering Seneca chief who lost his life on the lake. According to this tale, Agayenta was caught in a storm while hunting a bear and took shelter under a tree, only for lightning to strike, which ended up killing both him and the tree. The next day, Seneca people saw his body floating in a silent procession on the lake's surface, and from that day, the booms began. The legend goes that Manitou had cursed him for breaking traditional hunting codes, condemning him to wander the lake for 1,000 winters. For many locals, these sounds are a reminder of Agayenta's fate. Beyond New York too, the phenomenon has also spread to North Carolina's coastal areas, where residents have reported similar booms, strong enough to rattle homes in Cape Fear. But beyond the legends and everything, locals there have proposed some different explanations. Some believe that these are the echoes of past battles, especially in Civil War areas where gunfire and shouts are said to be heard. Others have suggested that the booms might come from UFOs or secret military testing. However, these theories don't quite fit, as records of the Seneca guns go back centuries before advanced technology existed. And in recent years, seismologists have also tried to match the booms with seismic activity, but they found no earthquakes during times when the sounds were heard. Other scientists have proposed natural causes like landslides, oceanic waves, or tectonic shifts. Despite these efforts, no theory has fully explained the noises, leaving the mystery kinda unsolved. And Seneca Lake has its own specific geological theory. The lake sits above an ancient canyon, and scientists believe natural gas trapped in sandstone deep below may escape as gas bubbles, which rises through the water and bursts at the surface with a loud noise. Reports of these sounds began to fade after gas wells and salt mines were opened nearby, suggesting that these new outlets may have released some of the gas pressure. Yet, even with this theory, no one is entirely sure if this explains all instances of the sounds across the region. Today, the Seneca guns remain as mysterious as ever and is left as a phenomenon without a clear explanation. So, the next time a strange boom echoes around you if you're in the area, it might just be the Seneca guns. The Ghost of Grace Brown. Grace Brown's story has left a long shadow over Big Moose Lake in upstate New York, where she had met a tragic end at the hands of Chester Gillette. Grace, who was a young woman from a modest farm, moved to work at the Gillette skirt factory and soon found herself charmed by Chester, the nephew of the factory's wealthy owner. Chester was a notorious flirt, often seen with women from prominent families, and kept his relationship with Grace secret. For her, Chester symbolized a life away from her family's farm, a future filled with love and security. But to Chester, she was just another hidden romance, and when Grace discovered she was pregnant in 1906, Chester's interest faded even further. She ended up pleading with him to marry her, knowing that an unwed mother faced a lot of harsh judgment in those days, but Chester avoided her until he finally suggested a trip to the Adirondacks in July. Grace thought this was finally her chance to marry, but Chester had other intentions. On July 11, 1906, the two arrived at Big Moose Lake, where Grace left her belongings at the station, likely believing she'd soon be starting a new life. They rented a rowboat and went out on the lake, but as they drifted, Chester struck her with a tennis racket, sending her overboard. Grace, who was unable to swim, drowned, with her body later found floating in the water. The picture that's up is actually a picture of the boat overturned. Chester then fled the scene, checking into a hotel under a false name, while Grace's body, bruised and carrying their unborn child, drifted on the lake. When her body was finally discovered, Chester was arrested, and his trial became a national sensation. Though he claimed Grace had taken her own life, letters she had written begging him for commitment told a different story. Found guilty of first-degree murder, Chester was sentenced to death and was executed in 1908, reportedly admitting to the crime privately but leaving the details hazy. Since then, Grace's memory has remained tied to Big Moose Lake, where visitors and locals alike have reported eerie experiences that they believe are linked to her. At Covewood Lodge, a historic vacation spot on the lake, employees have shared stories of encounters with what they feel could be Grace's ghost. For example, Rhonda Busala, who's a longtime staff member, recalls a strange moment inside the lodge's staff quarters. She described walking up the stairs, reaching for the light string, when an unmistakable presence stopped her in her tracks. She didn't feel fear, but sensed that someone or something was there, just beyond reach, almost as if she were intruding on a spirit still lingering in the shadows. At the same time, 3 of Rhonda's coworkers stood outside and witnessed what they described as the faint outline of a woman moving on the second floor. They watched as this figure lingered for a few seconds before vanishing. The employees, like many, believe it was Grace, with her spirit bound to the lake where her life was cut short. This wasn't just the last of the sightings though, but another Covewood Lodge worker, Linda Lee Mackin, also felt an undeniable presence one evening near the lake. She had been walking down to the lake's edge with a flashlight, which dimmed more and more with each step until it died completely just as she reached the water. Turning back to retrieve a friend, she returned to the spot, and as the mist lifted, they both saw the outline of a woman emerging from the fog. So yeah, stories like these have kept Grace's legacy alive, and today visitors can hike, camp, and row across the lake's waters, but many tread carefully, mindful of the stories of Grace's ghost said to appear in the mist or hover near the lodge. Locals share tales of sudden chills and flashes of sadness, almost as if Grace's spirit still wanders, searching for the peace she was denied in life. Her story has even reached beyond Big Moose Lake, inspiring songs, plays, novels, and the famous film A Place in the Sun, as well as a novel An American Tragedy, which dramatizes her life and tragic death. The Lady of Lake Ronkonkoma. Lake Ronkonkoma, which is Long Island's largest and deepest lake, is surrounded by tales of hauntings and tragedy that span centuries. The most endearing story is of Princess Ronkonkoma, a young Setauket princess who lived during the 1600s. Legend has it that she fell in love with an English settler named Hugh Birdsall. In secret, every night she would paddle to the center of the lake where she would send messages of love across to him on the opposite shore. This routine went on for years until her father, the chief, discovered their relationship and forbade her from ever seeing him again. Heartbroken and unable to live without him, the princess took her canoe to the lake's center and ended her life, plunging a knife into her heart. According to legend, her spirit now haunts the lake, vengeful and grieving, taking the life of one young man every year in search of a soulmate in the afterlife. Over the years, Lake Ronkonkoma has kept earning its reputation as a cursed place where drowning seemed more common than chance would dictate. Locals claim that nearly every year a young man is mysteriously drawn into the depths, never to return. And Dr. David Igneri, a lifeguard at the lake for over 3 decades, recalls that all 30 recorded drownings during his tenure were young men. On the History Channel's Weird US program, he also shared stories of the lake's dangers, describing its pitch-black depths where visibility fades entirely just 10 feet below the surface. Igneri himself had a haunting experience on July 4, 1965, where he dreamt of losing orientation underwater, only to surface amid fireworks. Later that day, a young epileptic boy drowned after having a seizure. Despite extensive efforts to locate him, his body was never found. Igneri's dream appeared to foreshadow this tragic event. The Long Island Paranormal Investigators, a local group dedicated to exploring urban legends and ghostly activity, have taken a special interest in the lake. Equipped with various devices to measure electromagnetic fields and detect disturbances, they have recorded unusual readings around the lake. However, co-founder Robert Levine remains skeptical, suggesting that these fluctuations might result from power lines or other environmental factors rather than supernatural forces. For Levine, the lake's size, depth, and combination with alcohol or risky behavior may simply explain the drowning incidents. But for others, however, the lore surrounding Lake Ronkonkoma is too pervasive to dismiss. Author Michael R. Eber, one of the foremost experts on the lake's stories, began investigating after a classmate drowned in the lake during his junior high school years. Ebert's research led him to publish The Curse of Lake Ronkonkoma, which is a book that delves into various legends and mysteries surrounding the lake. Beyond the story of Princess Ronkonkoma, he uncovered reports of mysterious fluctuations in the lake's water levels independent of rainfall or weather patterns, which indigenous tribes once attributed to Manitos, the spirit of the lake. An early 20th century study also found that while rainfall was below average over 7 years, the lake's water level had inexplicably risen by 7 feet, feeding the belief that it was influenced by something beyond natural forces. And something I want to add, which is kind of interesting, is an account that comes from the website medium.com and tells of a former lifeguard who worked at the lake as a teenager. He talks about how during a typical summer day patrolling in a kayak, he found that his kayak unexpectedly flipped. Although trained for emergencies, he was unable to free himself from the vessel. He then felt an odd, weird presence, and then out of nowhere, something seemed to grab him, yanking him underwater. Fighting to break free from what felt like a gripping force, he eventually resurfaced. When he shared the experience with a senior lifeguard, the response was casual, "So you got to meet the lady." And yeah, it's said that he left his job soon after that. Legend of Devil's Hole. Devil's Hole State Park in western New York is a place that's pretty beautiful if you've ever visited it, but it also has some strange aspects of it with a reputation that has made it memorable for more than just, the good views. According to Native American legends, a restless spirit haunts the area, especially in Devil's Den, which is a cave where visitors have reported a strange, heavy feeling as if something unseen is watching them. Some have even found signs of rituals, being animal bones and remnants of sacrifices left behind by those who might have tried to ward off or appease whatever is said to live in the shadows. And the stories around Devil's Hole grew even darker in 1763 with the massacre that happened there. This was during Pontiac's Rebellion, which was a campaign by Native American tribes to push back against British control. Basically, on September 4th, a British convoy of soldiers and supplies was passing through Devil's Hole when hundreds of Seneca warriors ambushed them. The convoy, only about 24 men strong, stood no chance against the Seneca forces. Nearly all of them ended up being killed, and only 3 managed to flee to nearby Lewiston to alert others. A second group of British soldiers then was sent in as backup, but by the time they arrived, the Seneca were prepared and easily overpowered them as well. So yeah, more than 100 British soldiers lost their lives in the attack. Locals then came to call this area Devil's Hole, a name that stuck, and for years many avoided it, saying that the spirits of those soldiers never left. These tragic events weren't the last that would give Devil's Hole its reputation though. In 1901, President William McKinley visited Devil's Hole while he was attending the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo. Just hours later, he was assassinated at the Temple of Music, and ever since, people have connected McKinley's death to the supposed curse of the park. This curse seems to show up in other ways too, as Devil's Hole has seen numerous accidents, people taking their own life, and other tragedies over the years. Some say that anyone who removes a rock from the park brings bad luck upon themselves, as though disturbing even a small part of the land might stir up whatever lingers there. And the path down the gorge is no easy walk. Visitors who descend the 410 steps winding along the ravine's edge are warned to be careful, and many say it's best not to hike alone. Those who have walked the path alone though have sometimes reported feeling as if they're being followed or watched. Others claim to have seen ghostly figures on the trails dressed like British soldiers from the 18th century, as if their spirits are still tied to the land where they met their end. Dorothy Arnold. Dorothy Harriet Camille Arnold, a socialite and aspiring writer, disappeared in 1910 under circumstances that have left her case unsolved for over a century. Born on July 1, 1885, into a wealthy Manhattan family, Arnold grew up with notable social standing, as her father, Francis R. Arnold, was a successful fine goods importer. The family lived on New York's Upper East Side, surrounded by high society, and Dorothy was really well educated. She attended Bryn Mawr College and aimed to establish herself in literary circles. However, her ambitions met early setbacks as her submissions to McClure's magazine were rejected, reportedly leaving her embarrassed and dejected. On December 12, 1910, 25-year-old Dorothy left her home, telling her mother that she was going shopping for a dress for her sister's debutante party. Declining her mother's offer to join, she set off alone around 11 a.m. She had about $30 with her, which was a considerable sum for the time, and proceeded to park and Tilford on 5th Avenue to buy chocolates. She then walked to Brentano's, a well-known bookstore, where she purchased Engaged Girl Sketches, which was a light-hearted book by Emily Calvin Blake. Witnesses later recalled that she behaved as usual, poised and polite. Outside the bookstore, she encountered a friend, Gladys King, who reported Arnold was cheerful and planned to walk through Central Park on her way home. This was the last confirmed sighting of Dorothy Arnold. When Dorothy failed to come home for dinner, her family grew really concerned. They discreetly contacted close friends and searched quietly, not wanting to draw public scrutiny. The Arnold family initially refrained from alerting the police, likely influenced by a recent widely publicized case involving a wealthy girl from a nearby family who had run away. They hoped to avoid similar scandal and embarrassment, and instead hired John S. Keith, a lawyer and family friend who conducted an initial investigation. Keith found that Dorothy's belongings appeared untouched, with no sign of her intending to leave for an extended period. Burned papers in her fireplace suggested she might have destroyed rejected manuscripts. After weeks of searching hospitals, jails, and even morgues, Keith advised the Arnolds to hire Pinkerton detectives who combed through Manhattan and beyond for clues, even investigating recent transatlantic voyages in case she had left the country. But they ended up coming empty-handed. Eventually, in January 1911, the Arnolds reported Dorothy's disappearance to the New York Police Department, who urged them to hold a press conference to gather public support. Her father reluctantly agreed, offering a $1,000 reward, which is around $33,000 today, for information. Reporters uncovered details of her relationship with a man named George Griscom Jr., a 40-year-old bachelor from a wealthy family whom Dorothy's parents disapproved of. Griscom, who was in Florence, Italy at the time of Dorothy's disappearance, denied knowing her whereabouts. Dorothy's mother and brother then traveled to Italy to confront him directly. Griscom maintained his innocence though, and even suggested that he would marry Dorothy if she were found, but her mother remained opposed to the idea. The police then received multiple tips, some from as far as San Francisco, where a jeweler claimed a woman matching Dorothy's description had ordered an engraved ring. Sightings were investigated, including rumors of Dorothy's presence in an Italian hotel, but none were confirmed. One rumor speculated that Dorothy had been killed during a botched abortion. This theory gained traction years later when a Pennsylvania clinic notorious for illegal abortions was raided. One doctor testified that a young woman matching Dorothy's description had died there and her body had been incinerated. However, her family dismissed these claims. In another alleged breakthrough, an imprisoned felon named Edward Glenarus claimed in 1916 that he had been paid to bury a young woman's body in West Point, New York. Glenarus described a scene involving a wealthy man resembling Griscom and a woman he identified as Dorothy. He recanted under questioning, and searches of locations he described led nowhere. Years passed, but reports of sightings continued, keeping hope alive, at least for her mother, Mary Arnold. In 1921, a police official also claimed to know Dorothy's fate, but the statement was later retracted. Her father, who never wavered in his belief that she had been murdered, passed away in 1922, explicitly excluding her from his will, convinced she was dead. Her mother also held on hope until her death in 1928. Peter Stuyvesant's ghost. Peter Stuyvesant, New Amsterdam's last Dutch governor, may have left the physical world in 1672, but it's said that his presence seems to linger in New York City's history, and as many claim, in spirit. Known for his strict religious beliefs and famously stubborn nature, Stuyvesant was a figure of control, enforcing a version of religious liberty that only applied to Dutch Reformed Christians like himself. Those outside his faith found no such freedom under his rule. After his death, tales began spreading of his ghostly presence, making him New York's oldest reported European spirit. St. Mark's Church in the Bowery, built in 1799 on the grounds of Stuyvesant's former estate, holds his tomb and has been the focal point for countless sightings and creepy events attributed to him. Basically, not long after his burial, household staff reported seeing his peg-legged figure roaming the grounds of what is now Stuyvesant Street. It didn't take long for locals to notice peculiar activity around the church. For example, during a 1744 fire that devastated the governor's former mansion, several onlookers described seeing a shadowy figure with a wooden leg pacing through the ruins, surveying the destruction as if mourning his lost estate. Then, by the early 1800s, Stuyvesant's restlessness was well known. When the city decided to run 2nd Avenue through his old churchyard in 1831, construction workers complained of strange noises near his tomb. As the work progressed, many reported loud thuds and even the sound of a peg leg knocking against stone. These disturbances escalated, and some swore they saw his specter stalking the churchyard, as though furious with the changes. Then, in 1865, a church sexton had his own frightening encounter. While preparing for an evening service, he heard the unmistakable sound of a peg leg tapping down the church aisle. Terrified, he fled, only to hear the church bell tolling mysteriously behind him. When locals arrived to investigate, they found the church locked tight, the bell rope inexplicably torn, with its frayed end draped over Stuyvesant's crypt. So yeah, this incident further fueled the stories. But regardless of this, more incidents piled up over the years. In 1884, during a church service, a loud voice interrupted the sermon, singing Dutch Calvinist hymns so powerfully that it drowned out the choir's English hymns. Congregants claimed it was Stuyvesant, still unhappy with the church's transition to Episcopalianism. Then, as the 20th century dawned, his ghostly appearances kinda seemed to fade away, yet he re-emerged whenever disturbances near his tomb occurred. When 2nd Avenue underwent construction again in the early 1900s, workers and parishioners reported the church bell clanging at odd hours, once again with no one to be found in the bell tower. Stuyvesant's spirit even seemed to appear for family occasions. In 1953, at the burial of his last direct descendant, mourners reported faintly hearing a rhythmic tapping, like a peg leg echoing through the church. Paranormal researchers claimed their photographs from that day contained strange shadows near the family crypt. Also, on Christmas Day 1995, as a church group finished their morning prayers, they heard someone singing an old drinking song from the reception hall. Rushing in, they saw a figure dressed in colonial Dutch attire, complete with a wooden leg, who vanished before their eyes. When they inspected the room, they found that the punch bowl had noticeably less cheer than before. And finally, just before Halloween in 2002, a late-night visitor to the church reported feeling someone or something following her, the sound of a wooden peg hitting the ground echoing behind her. She ran home without turning back, convinced Stuyvesant had decided to join her for the walk. So yeah, it seems that even centuries later, Stuyvesant hasn't fully departed. Whether he's kinda lingering to oversee his legacy, resentful of the city's transformation, or even just keeping an eye on the grounds that were once his, New Yorkers continue to wonder if Old Silver Nails will make another appearance. Old Greeny. Old Greeny is a mysterious creature said to dwell in the depths of Cayuga Lake. Cayuga Lake is the longest of New York's glacial Finger Lakes and reaches a depth of 435 feet, providing a vast and dark habitat where a creature of Old Greeny's description could conceivably hide. Tales of a massive serpent-like beast in Cayuga Lake date back to the 1800s, with local newspapers and folklore describing sightings of a giant eel-like creature that lurks below the lake's surface. One of the earliest recorded accounts comes from an article in the Ithaca Journal on January 5, 1897. The newspaper reported that some locals avoided assignments that would bring them near the water's edge, fearful of an encounter with Old Greeny. According to one story, a local man was driving along the eastern shore of Cayuga Lake with a friend when he saw what he described as a long sea serpent moving through the water. A passerby who also claimed to have seen the creature was convinced that it was a true lake monster. The nickname Old Greeny itself soon took hold, and for years scattered sightings would follow, each one adding to the growing reputation. By 1929, reports began to suggest that not just one but two large creatures might be inhabiting Cayuga Lake. The Ithaca Journal mentioned that locals were now claiming to see two massive large creatures, each around 12 to 15 feet long. Some speculated these creatures might be part of maybe a larger family of sea monsters, and they could have entered Cayuga Lake from nearby Seneca Lake through an underground channel. However, later geological studies would debunk the existence of such a connection, leaving the question of how these creatures arrived in Cayuga Lake unanswered. And one especially dramatic encounter I wanted to add allegedly took place in 1974, when a teenage boy named Stephen Griffin claimed that Old Greeny attacked him while he was swimming in the lake. Griffin reported that a massive creature with an eel-like body suddenly bit down on his arm, snapping it with surprising force. This frightening account of a physical encounter with Old Greeny stood out from the other sightings, which mostly involved people just observing the creature from a distance. Then, in 1979, another sighting added to the legend. Jack Marshall, the owner of a local diving company, was boating on Cayuga Lake with friends when he spotted what he initially thought was a large fallen log floating in the water. As they approached though, he realized that this so-called log was actually a living creature, estimated to be between 30 and 35 feet long. The creature then slowly sank beneath the water as the group looked on, leaving them in just shock. But yeah, explanations for what this creature might actually be kind of vary. Some believe it may be a lake sturgeon, while others think it could be a rare giant species of freshwater eel. These theories, however, don't fully satisfy those who claim to have seen the creature up close and describe it as something far stranger than any known fish or eel. Wildman of Winsted. The story of the Winsted Wildman is one of Connecticut's long-standing legends, originating in August 1895 when Winsted Town Selectman Riley Smith reported an encounter that would interest locals for years to come. Smith, while picking berries with his loyal bulldog near a wooded area in Colebrook, claimed to see a large, hairy man dash out of the bushes. This figure, which seemed to stand at least 6 feet tall, was described as muscular, covered from head to toe in dark shaggy hair and entirely naked. Smith's account detailed how the creature moved with unnatural agility, sprinting off into the trees at a speed he could hardly believe. Both Smith and his dog were left frozen in shock, with his dog supposedly so frightened that it whimpered and tucked its tail between its legs. In the days that followed, the Winsted Herald published Smith's account, sparking a wave of public interest and fear. Descriptions of the wild man then quickly circulated, each one depicting a towering, hairy figure that seemed more animal than human. Soon, others also came forward with sightings of their own. At least 2 more residents described the same figure, being a tall creature covered in hair and moving with a swiftness that defied its size. Some believe this figure to be Arthur Beckwith, an escaped patient from the Litchfield Sanitarium known for his erratic behavior. However, there was no direct evidence linking Beckwith to the sightings, and the Wildman of Winsted seemed to vanish back into the woods almost as suddenly as he'd appeared. But nearly 80 years later, the Wildman legend resurfaced. It was in July 1972 when 2 young men on Winchester Road near Crystal Lake Reservoir claimed to see a large, hairy creature from a distance. The figure they spotted was reported to be 8 feet tall, covered in thick fur, and standing upright near an old barn. They were certain that this was no bear, though some officials suggested they may have mistaken a black bear for something more mysterious. 2 years later, in September 1974, another sighting occurred, this time reported by 2 couples who were parked by Rug Brook Reservoir. The couples told police that they had seen a creature standing over 6 feet tall and weighing about 300 pounds, with its body dark with thick hair. This encounter terrified the witnesses enough to make them flee right away without a second thought. But when police conducted a search, they found no tracks, hair, or any evidence of a creature's presence. So yeah, these sightings combined with reports from the 1890s kept the mystery alive. Moving on to a little more analysis, the Hartford Sunday Globe speculated that the original 1895 sighting could have just been exaggerated or even concocted by Louis Timothy Stone, who was the editor of the Winsted Herald. Stone was known for sensationalizing stories to drive up sales, especially those involving strange and terrifying creatures. The tale of the wild man would have been ideal for capturing public interest during a slow news season. This suggestion that the story was a deliberate fabrication didn't stop it from growing though into a full-blown legend, nor did it quell the public's curiosity. Even the chief of police, Steve Wheeler, claimed to have encountered the wildman, though he lost track of it in a nearby swamp after a brief chase. But yeah, after all of this and all of the sightings, the word of the wildman spread across the region, and eventually a reward was offered for the creature's capture. A large search party of over 100 armed men then assembled to find the wildman, yet despite their numbers, they returned empty-handed, leaving the mystery unsolved. The 1970s sightings fit within a broader cultural obsession with Bigfoot and other cryptids, as reports of large hairy creatures hiding in American forests gained popularity. Some researchers speculated that these later sightings were simply bears mistaken for something more unusual, especially as black bears were making a comeback in the region. Yet the allure of a Connecticut wildman still kept locals fascinated, with some linking it to similar stories of the Gloakis, which is, if you know, another creature rumored to be a fisher cat but often exaggerated into something far more menacing. Buried treasure on Liberty Island. Captain William Kidd, who was a notorious figure in New York's history, is often spoken of in tales blending buried treasure with ghostly encounters. Born in Scotland in 1654, Kidd started his career as a privateer, a state-sanctioned pirate tasked with plundering enemy ships during wartime. He spent time in New York City, where he even contributed to the construction of the original Trinity Church. Kidd's role as a privateer allowed him to amass considerable wealth through the capture of enemy ships, especially during the war between England and France. However, his life took a darker turn as he shifted into the world of piracy, leading to his eventual capture, trial, and hanging in England in 1701. One of the most famous legends surrounding Kidd is his buried treasure on Gardiner's Island, located in East Hampton, New York. In 1699, with authorities pursuing him, he chose this secluded island to stash part of his bounty, reportedly valued at $30,000. The Gardner family granted him permission to bury his loot, which included gold coins, jewels, and other valuables. However, Kidd allegedly threatened them, promising retribution if the treasure was disturbed before he returned. When he was arrested, the authorities recovered his Gardner Island hoard, presenting it as evidence in his trial. Despite the recovery, Kidd's alleged wealth and further hidden catches became part of enduring folklore. Beyond Gardner's Island, there's some claims that Kidd also hid part of his loot on Liberty Island. Kidd had a prominent home in the New York area, leading some to believe he might have used the island as a strategic hiding place for his wealth. And another interesting part of Kidd's legacy includes the haunting of Liberty Island, specifically the area surrounding the Statue of Liberty. According to one account, in 1825, two soldiers stationed at Fort Wood, Sergeant Gibbs and Private Carpenter, uncovered what appeared to be Kidd's hidden chest. As they attempted to open it, they claimed to see the ghostly figure of Kidd rise from the ground. They described the ghost as demonic, gliding over the ground and emitting an otherworldly presence that terrified them, leading to their retreat right away. This sighting became one of New York's most well-known ghost stories, suggesting Kidd's restless spirit continues to protect his alleged treasure on Liberty Island. Kidd's spirit is also rumored to roam Trinity Church's graveyard, searching for a final resting place he never received. Some say he guards not just Liberty Island, but Trinity Church itself, reflecting how he's had historical association with the church and New York City. So yeah, to this day, treasure hunters and ghost enthusiasts still remain interested by the notion of Kidd's hidden treasure. Flying Head. The Flying Head, often called the Big Head or Great Head, is a mysterious figure in the legends of the Iroquois and Wyandot people, remembered for its terrifying appearance and malevolent presence. This entity is described as a massive, disembodied head, larger than any human, with dark hair flowing around the face, marked by piercing eyes and a mouth filled with sharp fangs. Its appearance is sometimes even more monstrous, with wings that look like those of a bat emerging from its cheeks and talons like those of a bird, which all enhance its overall frightening look. Legends say that it's practically invulnerable, with a hide that cannot be penetrated by any regular weapon. The tale of the Flying Head dates back hundreds of years, and according to Iroquois folklore, this being once drove out the original inhabitants from areas near the Adirondack Mountains and the headwaters of the Hudson River in what is now New York State. One version of the legend, shared by a Mohawk guide named Captain Gill in the 1800s, links the Flying Head to Sacandaga Lake near the town of Lake Pleasant. This area, which is reportedly inhabited by an unnamed tribe who settled on a hill behind what is now the Hamilton County buildings, carried a reputation for its association with the Flying Head. And the legend kept other tribes from entering, casting an overall dark presence over the region that lasted well beyond the era of this tribe, basically meaning that even as time passed, this fearsome lore was believed to linger over the area, as 3 hotels built on the same hill met mysterious fates, all destroyed by fires, as if the land itself resisted any attempt at settlement. Captain Gill, a well-known figure who lived with this family near the outlet of Lake Pleasant, spoke often of the Flying Head and the haunting reputation tied to the land. Despite this creepy history though, life still continued in the area. The presence of the legend served as sort of a warning and a reminder of the area's ancient and mysterious past, especially among locals who knew the tales well. Though it remains only a legend, the story of the flying head still persists in the oral traditions of the Iroquois and Wyandot peoples, who have passed down tales of this spirit through generations. While sightings and experiences are few, some believe the flying head still haunts the Iroquois region, with occasional reports of a large gliding figure circling around buildings or just moving quietly through the woods at night. Champ. The creature known as Champ or Champy is a figure believed to live in the depths of Lake Champlain, which is a long, narrow lake shared by New York, Vermont, and Quebec. Often compared to the Loch Ness Monster, Champ is one of North America's most famous lake creatures. With a long history of sightings and local folklore, Champ has drawn attention for over a century and continues to interest locals and tourists, making the legend a sort of staple of the region's identity. The legend of Champ dates back to the Native American tribes who once lived near Lake Champlain, particularly the Iroquois. They spoke of giant water serpents known as Onyarakoa that haunted the waters. But while there's no direct link between the native tales and today's sightings of Champ, it's thought that these early legends laid the groundwork for the creature's mysterious reputation. Many believe that French explorer Samuel de Champlain, the lake's namesake, was the first European to have seen the creature in 1609. According to an article in Vermont Life magazine, Champlain reportedly described seeing a 20-foot serpent with the head similar to that of a horse. However, there's no actual confirmed record that Champlain himself actually described such a creature. In his writings though, Champlain did mention a large fish known by the local people as the shoafaro, which he described as being up to 10 feet long, with a mouth full of sharp teeth, a snout over 2 feet long, and armor-like scales. Modern researchers though believe this was actually a gar, specifically the long-nosed gar, which is a type of fish native to the area. Sightings of Champ then continued into the 19th century. In 1819, an article in the Plattsburgh Republican recounted a sighting by Captain Crum, who claimed to see a serpent in Lake Champlain nearly 200 yards from him. Crum estimated the creature to be around 187 feet long and claimed to see details such as 3 teeth and eyes the color of peeled onions. He also described a red band around his neck and a white star on his forehead. Then, in 1883, Sheriff Nathan H. Mooney claimed he saw Champ himself. From his position on shore, Mooney reportedly observed a creature about 25 to 30 feet long with round white spots inside its mouth. His account encouraged others to come forward with similar claims, leading to a renewed interest in the lake monster. And P.T. Barnum, the famous showman, even offered a reward in 1873 and 1887 for anyone who could capture the creature. Barnum's reward though went unclaimed, but his involvement brought further attention to Champ. One of the most famous pieces of evidence for Champ's existence is the Mansi photograph, taken in 1977 by Sandra Mansi while on vacation with her family. Mansi's picture appears to show a creature's head and neck emerging from the lake. However, the exact location where Mansi took the photo was never identified, and she reportedly threw away the negative, which has cast doubt on its authenticity. Without these key details, experts could not verify the photograph, and some researchers speculate that the image might simply show a submerged tree or log. More recent sightings include a video taken in 2005 by fisherman Dick Affolter and his stepson Pete Baudet. The footage appears to show a plesiosaur-like animal in the water, though interpretations vary. Some believe it resembles a fish or eel. In addition to visual sightings, researchers have also captured mysterious sounds in Lake Champlain that some think could be evidence of Champ. For example, in 2003, the Fauna Communications Research Institute recorded sounds from within the lake similar to echolocation, a technique used by dolphins and whales, which don't inhabit Lake Champlain. These sounds were later analyzed, and some scientists proposed that the noises might have come from an unknown creature capable of echolocation. Further recordings were captured in 2018 and again in 2024, raising new questions about what could be causing these sounds in the lake's depths. In 2022, Champ's story reached a new audience with the filming of Lucy and the Lake Monster, which is a feature movie based on a children's book about a young girl and her grandfather searching for Champ. The movie, which filmed around Lake Champlain, drew attention from both locals and tourists and ended up rekindling interest in the legendary lake creature. Mary's Grave. The legend of Mary's Grave is one of Long Island's most enduring mysteries, mixed with shadowy tales of tragedy, betrayal, and haunting. The story is so widespread that nearly every village along the North Shore claims a piece of it, though most associate it with the Stony Brook and head of the harbor areas. What's clear though is that Mary's story has circulated in many forms over the years, growing from whispers into one of Long Island's most infamous legends. Despite countless retellings though, the details of Mary's life and death remain a puzzle. One version of the legend describes Mary as a lonely girl who lived with her father in a sprawling, isolated house along the shores of Stony Brook Harbor. Her mother had died shortly after childbirth, which was a tragic event that left Mary's father forever blaming her for the loss. Growing up in seclusion, Mary had few friends, spending most of her days wandering the nearby woods and the shoreline. Her isolation was only compounded by her father's deepening sorrow, which reportedly turned to cruelty over the years. He was well respected within the community, and in that small, tight-knit society, no one would have believed Mary's claims if she ever dared to tell the truth. In these accounts, the grim tale takes a more sinister turn as Mary's father's grief and religious fervor twist into a dark obsession. He begins viewing Mary as a mirror of her mother, a resemblance that tempts him beyond the bounds of fatherhood. With no means of escape and no one to turn to, Mary becomes trapped in her father's relentless control, suffering in silence. Then, as time passes, the legend claims Mary grew increasingly despondent, burdened with the horror of her circumstances. It wasn't long before she learned she was carrying his child, a revelation that pushed her over the edge. She retreated to the spring house by the harbor, a stone structure she had always seen as a refuge. But in her state, she found herself surrounded by the animals she had befriended there, and as despair took hold, she reportedly lashed out, tearing at the creatures with the hatchet that was always kept nearby. In that moment, she made a decision. That night, she returned to the house, hiding the hatchet beneath her dress. When her father called for her, she went to his bedside, only to bring the hatchet down upon him repeatedly, ending the years of torment in a single brutal act. The tale continues that Mary then climbed into bed beside her father's lifeless body, slipping into a deep sleep as though nothing had happened. Days passed and the townsfolk noticed her father's absence. When a few neighbors finally entered the house, they found Mary lying peacefully beside her father's decaying body, seemingly indifferent to his blood-soaked corpse. Outraged and horrified by what she had done, the townspeople dragged Mary down to a large tree that stood beside the road. In their eyes, she was guilty of an unforgivable crime, and they hung her from the tree to end her madness. But many believe that this brutal end only marked the beginning of Mary's story. Her spirit, it said, was bound to the places where she suffered most: the tree where she was hanged, the spring house by the harbor, and the house itself, forever trapped in the places that witnessed her deepest sorrows. Over the years, Mary's story became a test of bravery among local teenagers. The spring house in particular gained a reputation as a haunted site, a place where those who dared to visit might come face to face with her lingering spirit. Legend has it that those who urinate against the spring house walls will return to their cars to find them inexplicably stalled, or will suffer misfortune on the winding roads nearby. Some even report a figure in white appearing suddenly in the road, causing drivers to swerve and crash into trees. And for those who dare to walk by Mary's house at night, a light is sometimes seen in the upper window, and a figure, said to be Mary herself, stands staring out toward the tree where she met her end. But yeah, the dark nature of Mary's story, especially the elements of betrayal and suffering, led to its retelling in other forms. Some claim Mary was burned as a witch in colonial times, while others say she was a young woman who died tragically in a car crash. Still, others believe she was a victim of jealousy and murder, or conversely, that she took the life of her lover in a moment of madness. In all versions, however, Mary's spirit is restless, bound to wander the island in search of peace she will never find. Some say Mary's grave is merely a story, an urban legend symbolizing anger and loss. But yeah, while Mary's story is repeated across Long Island, some say the real Mary's grave is in Head of the Harbor, where a dilapidated house, sometimes referred to as the Weather Hill House, is rumored to be the place of her suffering. This site, marked by an eerie stone spring house and the massive hanging trees, is said to be where the tragic events unfolded. Locals report that strange occurrences surround the area, with eerie lights appearing in the spring house and sightings of a woman dressed in Victorian clothing carrying a hatchet. Another location rumored to be tied to Mary is Mount Misery, known for its own dark past and local tales of haunted asylums. Here, some claim Mary is a ghost tied to the ruins of an asylum, where her presence lingers near what is said to be a burial site on the south side of Mount Misery Road. And there are also parallels to an even older story rooted in European folklore. Tales of Black Mary's Hole, which is a natural spring in medieval England, similarly involved a woman named Mary and linked themes of isolation, despair, and death to water sources and springs. When settlers came to Long Island, they may have brought these tales with them, attaching the name Mary to local springs and ponds. Springs and wells often held mystical or dangerous association in European folk traditions, believed to be places of enchantment as well as cautionary markers to warn children away from dangerous waters. So that ends the video. Thank you all for watching. I appreciate it. Leave some feedback in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye. Kinderhook Blob. The Kinderhook Blob is one of the more stranger stories to come out of the Kinderhook, New York area, and it's left those who witnessed it grappling with the mystery that remains unsolved. Basically, what happened was throughout the 1960s and 1970s, several people in Kinderhook reported seeing a floating, ghostly white figure that they described as sort of like a blob. The being, however, was no benign oddity. It seemed to provoke genuine real fear enough that two grown men reportedly fled from it in panic despite arming themselves to confront it. The first recorded sighting of this blob came in 1962, witnessed by Bruce Halenbeck and his cousin Chari, both just kids at the time. According to Halenbeck's account, when I was 10 years old, I was up in the woods behind our house with my cousin Chari, who was then age 7. We both heard this really high-pitched whistle noise. They looked for the source of the sound, and Halenbeck described it a white object peering at me from behind a nearby pine tree. Halenbeck would later document this strange experience in a book he co-authored, Monsters of the Northwoods, making this encounter the start of the Kinderhook Blob legend. The creature then didn't reappear until 2 years later in 1964, when an unidentified man came across it during an evening hike in the woods. He described seeing a large white mass hovering down a hill in his direction. The shock was enough to make him jump over a 6-foot wide pond to escape. Determined to understand what he had seen, he returned to the spot with a friend, this time armed with a shovel and pitchfork. As they waited, the friend's face reportedly turned pale as he pointed to a white figure gliding silently through the treetops. This was enough for both men to completely lose their nerve and run, abandoning their makeshift weapons. Whether it was a continuation of sightings from 1964 or a separate event, another encounter too with the blob happened around this time, though some sources place it in 1978. Basically, in this one, two teenage campers, Barry Scott and Russell Lee, were staying in the woods when they heard something approaching their tent. Curiosity got the better of them, and they peeked outside to see what they would later describe as a floating white figure moving towards them. Scott described the being, as he quoted, a bell-shaped white form, while Lee saw it as resembling the Virgin Mary due to its flowing robe-like shape. The figure then drifted away into the dense woods, leaving the teens standing there confused. Some local tales speculate on what the Kinderhook Blob might be, with guesses ranging from a ghost to a strange creature hibernating in the woods for decades. This mysterious figure is also not the only odd occurrence in Kinderhook either. Reports of strange UFOs and a large red-haired creature resembling Bigfoot have also surfaced in the area. One sighting even involved Halenbeck's relatives, who once spotted an enormous, loud creature near their home. Disturbed by the sounds, Halenbeck's cousin grabbed a shotgun to scare it away, but the creature seemed to vanish into the night without a trace. Legend of Abigail West. Born around 1764 in New Milford, Connecticut, Abigail West started life as part of the Platt family before marrying William Barber West, a Rhode Island man, in 1783. Together, they moved to Queensbury, New York in search of new opportunities, settling near what is now Butler Pond. On the mountain, they built a simple life and raised 6 children: Abeline, George, John, William Jr., Thomas, and Mary. Then, on May 11, 1811, according to local lore, Abigail was struck by lightning while out on the mountain near the pond. It's said that after the strike, she managed to crawl over a mile trying to find help before she eventually succumbed to her injuries. Her remains went unfound for days, and once they were discovered, she was buried on West Mountain in the family cemetery. Her gravestone had a weeping willow carved on it, perhaps as a symbol of mourning and loss. Then, for many years, people believed Abigail's spirit still lingered on the mountain, searching for her children. Some say she would appear near her gravestone, while others claim to have seen her wandering the woods, driven by a mother's longing to be reunited with her family. But after 40 years, her grave was moved down to Bay Street Cemetery in Glens Falls. However, when workers tried to exhume her, it's said that her body wasn't there. The mysterious absence only fueled local superstitions, and whispers began that Abigail had become something more than just a lingering spirit. Some locals went so far as to call her a witch, claiming she haunted the mountain and set fires in her old chimney to mark her presence. It was said that if anyone climbed up West Mountain on John Clendon Road, they might see the abandoned brick chimney still standing, and on rare nights, even catch sight of her lighting a fire within it. People even described how she chased them down the mountain afterward, hoping to ask them if they'd seen her family or knew where her body lay. Other versions of her story also became even more dramatic. Some claimed she'd been burned at the stake, or that she had perished in a fire on her prom night while waiting for a date that never came. Yet those who know the facts about Abigail's life understand that she was a mother, not a young girl waiting for prom, and that her so-called witchery only began after her death. Abigail's spirit became well known after that, even beyond local folklore. Over time, her gravestone was the only one brought down from West Mountain, leaving many to wonder why hers alone was moved. People have tried to pry apart the stone, with some even defacing it before it reached Bay Street Cemetery. Still though, her stone remains a focal point of her story, and many who visit it say they can kinda feel her presence near it. Some say they've even stumbled or tripped while walking the mountain, as if Abigail is trying to catch their attention, hoping to find someone who can help her find peace. Even now, she's set to search the mountain, just wanting to join her family and find the rest that she was denied.